Hello and welcome to another React Rally speaker interview. I am Jameson Dance and I am here with Marcy Sutton. How's it going, Marcy?
Hi, it's going pretty well.
Great. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit for people who haven't heard of you?
Sure. I'm Marcy Sutton. I am a senior front-end engineer at DQ Systems, which is an accessibility company. I work remotely on accessibility tools like browser extensions, doing a bit of consulting for clients, basically helping them to make web applications more accessible to people with disabilities.
Is that just kind of a contracting agency that does this kind of thing? Or I haven't heard of them except as your employer, so I don't really know much about them.
Yeah, so DQ is a company that all they do is accessibility. And so a part of the company is, helping remediation, like if you were a big bank or an airline and you had a concern about accessibility, DQ is a company that you could help as, a group of experts to come and help you make your to lower your risk, or if you're, a proactive company, like some people will come in and say, hey, we want to make our site more accessible. Can you help us?
Okay.
And so,
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a portion of the business. And then there's a product development part of the company where we work on tools for developers and QA people to help them in that process so that companies can become self-sustainable when it comes to accessibility.
Okay. So I think it's fair to say that you're pretty well known as an accessibility expert. How did you come first to programming and then to that specific niche of programming?
I began building websites when I was probably in high school, and I was way more visual oriented at that time. I followed my passion of photography to college and went and got a degree in photojournalism.
Oh, cool.
Which is really fun, and I loved it a lot, except when I entered the job market, newspapers were all going under.
Sure.
It was right when digital SLR cameras came out, and I sort of saw the writing on the wall that that was not a viable career path. Unless I wanted to move to the middle of nowhere and work at a tiny paper, and then really be sort of underpaid. I wanted to live wherever I want and, find something that was steady work and not have to struggle too hard. So I pivoted at some point and really went for web development because it was something I'd been doing anyway. Like my focus at photography school was creating websites. So
cool.
It wasn't really a stretch, but my first few projects in photography school were creating websites for documentary projects and that sort of thing.
Okay. So it sounds like it was a pretty deliberate move. I feel like I hear a lot of people that kind of just stumble into it, but it sounds like you looked at it and said, this will help me have the lifestyle I want.
Exactly, I did. And
That's
so
cool.
my first job was an internship at a design firm where I really got into web development, and I was sort of a one-woman show at that small company. So I got really used to figuring things out without much help. Which is a good skill if you've ever worked with people.
Sure.
Ever worked with people who don't know how to search their email inbox to get an answer before they ping the whole company. So I got pretty self-sufficient, and I think that set me up well now because I work remotely and you sort of need to figure things out sometimes before you can ask for help. But eventually I really wanted to work with teams and learn from other people. So I upgraded to a bigger company at Pop Agency. And it was there working on client projects. They had a big range of clients like Xbox, Nintendo, Target, lots of arts organizations, and lots of different websites to work on. But I ended up getting pulled into the Target account. And if you know anything about Target, the retailer in the US, they were sued for accessibility in about 2007.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, they were. Their site, the checkout online was not accessible using a screen reader. And so it was a pretty big problem. If you rely on a screen reader, you couldn't check out and purchase. So that's how that lawsuit came about. The National Federation of the Blind helped that along, and history was made that, Target was a big retailer that had to make things accessible. So working at an agency, everything that we made for Target had to be accessible. And so when I took the lead role on that account, that's sort of how I got dropped into accessibility. And I really found that I cared about it. It was It was really cool design challenges, cool technical challenges. And I've sort of never gotten it out of my mind ever since. And that was probably 7 or 8 years ago now.
Okay. So that's kind of your superhero origin story.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah,
Cool.
6, 7 years. Maybe it feels like it's been so long. I can't even really imagine like turning that part of my mind off now. It's like inclusion and accessibility is just always there in my mind. So that there was a time when I didn't know any of it. I didn't know about Aria. I didn't know really any of this stuff. And so, yeah, at some point I just thought it was something really rewarding and I decided to go for it.
That makes sense. So, I'm definitely not an accessibility expert. I do a little bit and I try and implement what I know. But from my outsider, I'd call it an outsider's perspective, it seems like the technologies that have become more popular in web development, especially front-end kind of JavaScript frameworks, have a lot of accessibility problems. And I wonder how the kind of technical work of making things accessible has changed since you've gotten into it.
I think the tools that we have evolved a lot. I mean, even just thinking about browser debugging tools have evolved. There's still some gaps. I think we need a little better support for debugging screen readers. But really, it's gotten easier as web technology development tools have evolved. Like now we have browser tools for accessibility specifically. So I've seen it get better. Something that we still need a lot of work at is educating people about it. You know, helping people who make frameworks and tools know that it's an anti-pattern to put out something that's inaccessible. So that's why I go and give talks, is to try and spread awareness, you know, show people how cool it is, and then it is possible to have something that's well designed and well executed and be accessible.
So that's interesting that you feel like things have gotten better. I was looking at it from the perspective of everything used to be kind of server rendered HTML, and HTML is pretty accessible just by default. And now we have all this rich JavaScript interaction that to me, it feels like I need to do a bunch of extra work to make that accessible. Does that hold true in your opinion, or am I mistaken about that?
I think there's definitely some increased complexity. Like the stuff I'm working on right now is pretty complicated, and there's no doubt about it that a server rendered, you know, simpler web page would probably be easier for accessibility, but it wouldn't be as rich. It wouldn't be as interactive. I think our expectations of users have evolved. And so it's definitely more complicated, but I think there's a bigger prize to be won in that things could be more intuitive and easier to use. But, you know, the flip side of that is we do have a lot more to think about. In a web application, there's definitely more that we need to do. But we're doing more anyway. They're more complicated web applications now.
Sure. That makes sense. So I want to ask you a little bit about some of the work you've done. I know you've been pretty heavily involved with Angular and you work on the Aria project. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So for about 10 months or so, I worked on the Angular Material project, which is a UI library sponsored by Google, getting a set of material design components built in Angular. And so I worked on that for a while and got to see accessibility start to evolve a little bit. And my original reason for getting into it was that it was sort of terrible for accessibility.
Okay.
To be totally blunt, it was pretty bad. I saw an opportunity to make it better and to, you know, get people internally thinking about it. I was working as a contractor with Google on that project. And at the time, there was a community effort for a module to help with Aria, you know, to help if you were using things to disable parts of your application and you're using it on a custom element, that there needed to be a little more help from the framework to make sure that you're applying the right attributes. Like if you need to disable something in a screen reader and you're creating a completely custom form control, we needed a way to easily manage, you know, the accessibility information for that using Aria. And so I got asked to review this module called Aria. It wasn't my creation to begin with. And so I did the best, you know, review of it I could at the time. At that moment, I was still pretty new to frameworks, and I remember it being like really cool, but I didn't quite know why you would need it. And I think some of that initial confusion of identity is why that lived on as, a sort of, I have a love-hate relationship with Aria.
Okay.
It was a really great way to learn about frameworks. We've tried to iterate on it over time and add features that make it stronger. Like originally it would put Aria all over everything, like put tab index on a button that already is tabbable and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
So we had to refine it over time. And I think the trouble with versioning is that, not everyone upgrades. And so
Sure.
some of those flaws have lived on. At this point, I think you're probably better off without it. I don't think it's a very useful module, but I've learned a lot about it since then.
So useful for what it taught, but what should people use now if they're in that world?
I think you should use semantic HTML elements, like use buttons, use real form elements, and then you don't really need the Aria support. I think you should use it if you're writing a lot of custom controls and you need Angular's help in managing Aria, like if you're using ng disabled on a custom element or something. It could be pretty useful so that you don't need to, manage all of those attribute bindings. But a lot of times the problem with it was that people would just add it into their app and be like, yay, it's accessible, but they didn't know what it was doing. And so I'm actually working on a big app that pulls it in and I see what problems it caused now. So I'm not a huge lover of Aria these days.
Okay.
I think you can have more control without it. It does a little too much magic.
Sure.
So I don't know if
saying something does too much magic is a great way to convince the JavaScript community. So I think that's good. Say it's less modular, and then people will be like, "Oh, I don't want that."
Yeah. What we tried to do was look at the common accessibility problems it's not unique to Angular, but I mean, in client rendered apps. And a big problem was that people would attach click events to divs or to, a random generic element that doesn't have accessibility support. And so we tried to fix that with the module, and that fixing in a framework is really hard to know how people are going to use it. So I found, my approach to accessibility for frameworks has evolved to more tooling. It's probably a good segue to mention what I'm going to talk about at React Rally is
Sure.
I'm focused way more on tooling. Like if you could run a checker as part of your development workflow and have it point out everything that's broken instead of trying to magically fix it at runtime. And so I came out of that Aria fix it magically camp and have evolved now. I think it's way better to address it at development time. So
okay.
Lots of learning.
That kind of fits in with what you were saying earlier about developer education, that you can kind of solve the problem at the root in some ways.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you knew that you'd applied a click event to a div and, because your development workflow told you that it was a problem, you'd catch it a lot sooner than, having someone audit your site after it's already out there to find it. So yeah, it's just a better practice to put developers in the driver's seat and say, hey, you should fix this, instead of trying to understand their intent. In framework, it's really hard to understand intent.
Sure. I still remember the moment I realized that just putting on-click on a div was it's convenient for me, but it's really inconvenient for some other people. And that kind of blew my mind because I saw stretching behind me how many thousands of times I've done that. Man, I've made some horrible stuff. That actually might be a good transition to talk about the A11Y. Is that how I pronounce it? A11Y Wins project that you do?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that because I feel like a lot of what I hear about accessibility makes me feel bad about how horrible I am. And this is, I'll see if I can explain it. You can correct me. It's a showcase of products and sites that do accessibility really well. And you kind of look at them and point out, this is awesome. People will be more like them, instead of fire and brimstone on people that are doing it wrong. Is that an accurate description?
Yes, it was born out of that same sort of frustration with, you're doing it wrong and this sucks. And everyone's got the opinions fly a lot,
Yeah.
JavaScript fatigue. And so I really felt like we needed some positive influence. I'm just I am not a big fan of negativity in my life anyway. I try to, be optimistic. And so it really kind of bled over into my work life that I wasn't a big fan of the, like, you're doing it wrong school of web development and accessibility. Mm-hmm. And so I just started collecting examples. Turns out it's a lot easier to find fails than it is to find wins. And so, my posting frequency is not quite as often as I would like. I do get people that submit stuff to my blog. And if you've got something you've worked on that you're proud of for accessibility, definitely let me know. Part of the challenge is being able to look at something that maybe a portion of it is a big win, but being able to overlook the rest of it that isn't. I've gotten tripped up on that a few times, especially because if I write about it as a win and someone finds something wrong with it in the accessibility community, they love to point it out. They love to, I don't know. I think it's a striving to make things better. But the way that it comes across sometimes is, I don't know. It's not really a win anymore.
Yeah.
It's really hard to find them. So it's imperfect, but I think that positive energy I've gotten such good feedback from people who were really seeking that positive influence and leadership. And so it's been totally worth it to see how people responded. I think people really want those positive examples.
Yeah, it's really nice to look at something that does it right and say, like, I'll be like them, instead of just reminders of how broken my stuff is.
Yeah, I feel it, because then it puts the burden on you to figure out, well, what is right?
Yeah.
What does work then? And you're like, oh, well, that didn't help me at all, except to make me feel bad,
Yeah.
So
sure.
I try to find good examples. It is really challenging sometimes, but they're out there and people are creating them every day.
So you mentioned that part of the theme of your React Rally talk is around tooling. Do you want to talk about any of the tooling? Is any of it specific to React, or are these more general, just kind of front-end tooling things?
Yes. So there is a browser extension or a set of extensions that I work on called Axe. It's AXE, Axe Core, if you're going to go look for it, because it is not Axe body spray.
I didn't realize they were so passionate about this.
Axe Core. Yeah, that's how we search for it.
Okay.
But it is an accessibility engine that powers these extensions to let you run an audit. Like, just run a set of checks and see what's going on in your application. And so the browser extensions are one part of what I'm going to talk about, but the underlying engine is all written in JavaScript. It's framework agnostic at this time, but there's actually an effort to move Axe into the Firefox developer tools, and those are written in React. So there's a movement to, we might retool in React, but even if we don't, I think there's some concepts in accessibility testing of React applications that will definitely come up in my talk.
Oh, cool.
It's going to be a pretty fun talk, though. It's called Where in the Stack is Carmen San Diego? Or sorry, I had to change the name to because it is trademarked.
Shoot.
Where in the Stack is Carmen San Francisco is the name that I chose. But it's inspired by the 90s computer game. And there was a TV show, too.
I played that game a bunch.
I loved that game.
It was so good.
So in working on these browser extensions and node modules and what else? There's been all of these different contexts that I've been kind of going between. Like, if I'm writing a node API to be executed in a browser, it gets a little confusing sometimes, like what context you're in and what you can and can't do. And so the talk is basically a game show about traveling through the stack. And the React Rally edition will have some React specific things like, testing the virtual DOM or, things that we've learned kind of retooling in React and how accessibility plays into that and what parts are confusing. And it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm really excited for it. Well, Marcy, thank you so much for your time. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, how do they do that?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm Marcy Sutton. I've got a website of the same name. That's definitely the easiest way to find me. There's also an accessibility Slack channel that I founded with Ryan Florence. He was the one who set it up initially. I can maybe shame him into actually coming back in there. I haven't seen him there in a while. But we have like over 700 members, and it got sponsored by Slack. So we are an official Slack accessibility channel. It's web-a11y.herokuapp.com. That's the sort of open sign up. But you can always find me in there. That's a really great resource if you're getting into accessibility, and you can ask any expert in accessibility at any time, whatever question. It's pretty awesome.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of the time I'm not sure what to do. So that's knowing who to ask about what to do is a great resource.
If you don't use Slack, that channel has been mirrored the W3C's Gitter, so you can get there through Gitter as well.
Oh, cool.
They have if you look up A11Y Slackers, you'll probably find it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Marcy, and we will catch you at React Rally.
Cool. Thanks.